Hello, so I'm an animator, a 2D animator to be precise. I've been teaching myself animation for quite a few years now, since 2022, so a couple of years. While I'm not the greatest animator ever, I certainly know a few things about animation. And one animation that intrigued me in particular was the Sonic Shadow Generations Dark Beginnings teaser. So I thought it would be great to analyze it, because when I first watched it, I found the animation to be so intriguing, because it's so beautiful! But I was trying to figure out how the heck it was made, because it was just intriguing to me. Is it 2D? Is it 3D? Is it a mix of both? What is it? I need to know. I really need to know. So, it was confusing me, me viewing it on my little phone. So I thought I would take it upon myself to look at it more in depth on the computer on my big drawing tablet screen. So I thought it would be really fun to go through this animation scene by scene, and we can try and figure out, is this animation fully 2D? Is it 3D? Is it tweened? What techniques do they use? Because it's very interesting. Let's get started.
Professor Gerald made me the ultimate life form. I should be the key to all manner of medicines. Curing you.
Wow. Right, let's analyze up until this point. 10 seconds in, yeah? So, something that definitely gives away if something is 2D or 3D is the shading. Due to how tedious 2D animation is, frame by frame animation to be exact, the shadows are very deliberate. The shadows and highlights are very, very deliberate. Some of them are even simplified, right? And people also add this thing called cell shading, which is this hard shading that you see in shadow here onto 3D models, right? To give a similar 2D effect. However, it's not quite the same as hand drawing the shadows yourself. If you think about it, if you hand draw like shadows over and over again, you're going to do your best to simplify them and put them where it's necessary. In a 3D model, more stylized shadows like this, even highlights too, can behave very differently. For those who aren't really into like the arts really, or animation, or more of just like a casual viewer, I thought it'd be worth going over the difference between shading in a 3D model and shading in a 2D drawing. Keep in mind, depending on like the 3D model and the quality of it, the shading can look more direct, I guess, more hand-drawn and limited. So here's a screenshot of this character here called Deku, who's from My Hero Academia. This is a screenshot from one of the video games that use 3D models that try to emulate this sort of anime style. Now, this is actually a great example, because if you look at the shadows, there's this weird highlight up here. The hair shadows, they don't feel super intentional. If you look at the shading here, an animator hand drawing this would just have this fully like grayed out, fully shadowed, instead of having this weird highlight here. The shadow and highlights and how they react to going over the model overall react kind of weird. And because it's 3D, you can also add more shading and do it quicker. You can see here how Deku's got multiple shadows. He's got these highlight layers, he's got these shadow layers. And this is added because you can do this on a 2D drawing, but it takes more time. Now let's look at a screenshot of him from the anime. You can see here how the shadows are overall a lot more simplified. There's no shadows on his backpack here because it's not really needed. Focus here is on Deku, so the shadows are going to be on Deku. You can see here how the shadows are very simplified, one tone. There's a couple of fully black shadows here and there, and his hair and under his chin. But you can see how direct and simplified the shadows are. If you compare 2D and 3D cell shaded characters, you can just tell most of the time what is 2D and what is 3D. Because it's how the shadows react. Because an animator intentionally hand draws these shadows to be under his hair, under his neck, maybe in a few creases here and there in his clothes, to convey the information that is needed. Whereas this, because the shadows are trying to react to like a 3D model would react, it's like it tries to calculate the shadows in a sense. It's not very stylized. It's trying to do it more realistically in a sense. Although you can add cell shading to 3D characters, the shadows will still react like it's a 3D character and not a 2D character. I know you can like manually adjust where you want shadows to show and not show, but that's very complicated and it takes a lot of time. It's very hard to replicate the look of 2D hand-drawn artwork in a 3D space. It's possible, but it's very hard. Let's look at another example. This is another character from My Hero Academia from the same video game. I think it's called like One's Justice or something. You can see the shadows, how they're quite rough almost. And you can see how he's got the shadow here above his lip. You can see how jagged the shadows are too. They're very jagged. And you can see this weird circling here on his hair. Even this like tiny little small rimlet here. I don't think an actual animator would add that. Same with these little highlights here in his shoulder. and his neck. Unless it was extremely high budget, I don't think an animator would really add this. So you can see here how the shadows are a lot more direct, you know, there isn't this weird like spotting going on with the shadows and highlights on his hair. It's very shadow there, shadow there, shadow there to convey that his hair's spiky. There's no weird shadow here above his lip. You could add one around here to emphasize this little like his cheek pulling up when he smiles or grins, but that isn't added. The shadows in his gauntlets are very limited as well. Same with his clothes, because this is a 2D like series production, so it's, you know, so the animation's very limited. Whereas you compare it back to this, you can definitely tell a difference, that this is 3D and this is 2D. You can definitely tell a difference. I hope that clarifies the difference here. So you can see here in shadow how he's, well, got a lot more shadows. He's got a shadow down here. You can see in his like jaw here, he's got this like gradient shadow here. His rings are very detailed. This is possible in 2D. It takes a lot of work. His eye shadow's got this a little bit strange behavior for like 2D animation, I guess, because normally a 2D animator would just have that going straight down instead of having this weird thing. Same with his spikes. It'll be very direct. We can see here how it reacts to a new plane, because this is a 3D model. You can see here how it's got bounce light here, and the bounce light here is more 2D. This is more 2D bounce lighting. That's something I would add to one of my animations. This is very jagged. If this was a 2D animated drawing, I don't think that sort of thing would be added. It'd be simplified. It would just be like a line, you know, kind of like how you'd see right here in his ear. Kind of just applied here, but you can see how it's jagged there. Also, I want to make clear, just because I'm like saying, oh, this isn't 2D, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not like dunking on this because it's 3D and it's not 2D. I'm showing the differences and how impressive the stylization is here, because this genuinely had me fooled for like a second. And this is actually one of the better takes I've seen on trying to replicate 2D hand-drawn animation style but with 3D. This is really good. And you can see here on his chest fluff too, they've actually tried to add more direct shading here. You can see how it's only responding here, you know, it's very direct, which is really nice. His shadows on his hands are actually very direct, and as you saw in the My Hero Academia 3D model examples, or even on Shadow's spikes here, this one here especially, it can be quite jagged. I mean, look, see, they did the thing in his eye, they've simplified his eye shading. You know, this is really close. They've really tried to replicate that 2D look. They've almost got there, you know, and this is really impressive. Also, one thing I really want to note here is a really good attention to detail that they've done here for Shadow, for trying to replicate that more 2D animation style. A big mistake some like animators will make when trying to make a 3D model look and behave like a 2D animation is that they don't animate their 3D model like a 2D animation. You see here how limited Shadow's poses are? Like, his keyframes are very intentional. It's not got like lots of keyframes like you'd see like in a video game or something, because that's like 3D animation. They've actually tried to replicate the 2D limited animation style here. See how you don't need to see his hands clenching into a fist. It's one frame they're open, next frame they're in a fist. That's because of how limited the frames are. And I think that's really great that they've done this. A good giveaway this is 3D is you see how the shadows on his fingers are all jagged and they expand out here. If this was a 2D drawing, it would just be like how you see this one shadow here and this like highlight there. That's how it would look if it was a 2D drawing. But because it's 3D, there's going to be some like artifacts, I guess. It's going to be some wee jagged areas here and there. I love the attention to detail that they've put in here, you know, limiting the animation frames. More frames doesn't always equal a better end product, you know. Especially if you're trying to replicate the 2D look. More frames doesn't necessarily look better, because you think about it, it's hand drawing, you've got a limited time. Sometimes you need to lower that frame rate. But yeah, I love how they've done this.
I should be the key to all manner of medicines. Curing you.
That shot's beautiful. With Shadow like slamming his fist down. It's a beautiful shot. That looks... Actually, that almost looks 2D. Yeah, this almost looks 2D. There's a little bit of weird highlights here and there, like this on his ear. Reflecting, which I don't think it should be. I mean, I guess it's trying to reflect this light over here, but it's very jagged and it doesn't really look hand-drawn. Because actually, look at his chest fur. Look at how the chest, like the line art for his chest fluff, even here, has variation. Like, it looks like it's actually hand-drawn here. Maybe it actually is, and maybe it's just his head that is 3D modeled. I mean, you guess you'd find out. But no, it's not actually. It's actually, this is actually so cool. Because if you look here, you'll be like, oh wow, look at the variation. It looks like this is a real artist that's hand-drawn this, maybe messed up line art a little. You can see there's a couple little blobs. And that's actually a really good detail. I don't know if it's intentional or not, because you know when you animate something, you'll make a few mistakes in the line art, you know? Line art's basically the inking phase of the animation process. You can see here how there's a little blob there. And it's like, wow, what's with that tiny little blob there? And then it's actually his, like, arm ending. Some of this really strange highlight in his arm here. If they're going for that 2D look, it's very close. Like, you can see here how the side of his face. You can see here how it's got like a really harsh highlight. Same with his chest fluff too. That's really good because it looks 2D. I'm actually really surprised at this. They've really exaggerated this shot. Look at that. See how his fist squashes? Look at that. That's really cool. You can actually see the line change there. Look, so that's kind of thick there, but it's thin there. Interesting. Yeah, and I've added some room lighting. Even like they've added a little crease here in his palm to emphasize that he's really scrunching up his hand. He's really frustrated, you know? So sometimes a lot of animators will do, you'll see this Maria later, where they will remove a bit of line art, you know, when it's like a hand crunching up. They won't draw every single like crease of the hand, like of the finger. But here they've removed some parts. You can see here in his thumb they've removed it. Sometimes animators will only just draw as much detail that needs to be conveyed. Like they'll simplify an eye, so you'll be like, wow, that's an eye. I can tell that's an eye, even if it's very simplified, if that makes sense. Yeah, look at that. And there's no line art here at all. Very nice. I like the squash and stretch too. You can see how his shadows move too, his shadow there moving. To make it almost look 2D, because the shadows are quite inconsistent in 2D, because you'll see them jitter around and all that. Obviously it's possible to get very stable shading in 2D, it's just quite tricky to do sometimes, depending how much is there. I like kind of added these hard shadows on his rings to also give that hand-drawn look, and a little bit of gradient for bounce light. Very nice. Again, I'll mention, for 3D animation, this is really impressive. Like, sure, it's actually cheaper than doing it hand-drawn because hand-drawn is very expensive. But for what they've worked with here, trying to make a 3D model look more 2D, it's really good. It's just really impressive, even with the flaws. Remember how I was mentioning this weird spotting thing in Bakugo's hair here? You see the same thing happening here with Maria's hand. You see this spotting going on? I can see what they're trying to do with it. But look, see how limited the animation is? That's really impressive. You know, that's really well done. But yeah, you can see how the shadows react to her fingers. This is not super intentional. You can see how it jiggles around there. Whereas if it was 2D hand-drawn, it would just be like straight, if that makes sense. It wouldn't really have that jitter, I guess. Unless it's like a smear frame. But yeah, you can see that. And then Maria goes to... Look at that! See in her nose, anime styles do this a lot, where they don't include line art in some certain areas. You know, just because... They don't need to, you know, you can tell that's a no, so why would you need to add that line there to show that it's a no, it's, you know? So I like how they've actually removed some of the line art to give it that more hand-drawn look. Same with her mouth. I guess it's amazing. I'm really impressed. It almost looks 2D, it's very close, but as you can see here, there's this weird line art thing here. This weird shadow that gives it more of a 3D look than a 2D look, so you can tell they're definitely 3D models. All I'm doing is proving that these are 3D models and not like hand-drawn, but again, that's not bad. It's not bad, it's really impressive that I've managed to try and... You don't often see animation studios or even just independent animators replicate that anime look in 3D well. Like, CG anime doesn't always look the best. Sometimes it does, sometimes quite a lot of the time it doesn't, because it's very hard to do. You can see here how they've really tried to replicate that anime style. It's not easy to do. Because look, you see how more direct the line art is? Very direct. The shadows just aren't too direct. They're more direct here. You can see how this is more of like a hand-drawn thing. You can see how an animator would just draw a shadow on her neck and just fill that out to be a shadow. You can see here in the hair and her little, like, is it like her little puffy shoulder in her outfit. You can see here there's no line art there. 3D models have this weird thing of like thick and thin line art. You can just tell it's like 3D. It's hard to explain. But look, see the finger thing in Maria. You see this better later on, but you can see how there's no line art here if you look close enough. But I really love how they've done this. See how limited the animation is? Her hair doesn't actually move from these frames, really. It's just the same frame, but it's just the same, like, it's the same frame, but she's just budged over, except her arms have moved a little. You can see how she's got the shading on her hair, how you can tell it's not intentionally drawn in, you know, you can tell it's 3D. But like, look at this, bro, this is gorgeous. I'm actually pretty mind blown this is 2D, and look, something that's really impressive I want to add. I don't know if this is like, maybe like a 2D animation just put in here, or what, but this is really impressive. Look at this strand. You see how it splits? It splits to give it that 2D inconsistency. How do they do that? 3 strands, and then it splits off into 5 strands. Then that strand merges back in. How did they do that? I might have a little feeling maybe this is just a 2D drawing added on to this 3D model just to split the hair. Or maybe they've just like managed to position the hair strands in the 3D model to look like bigger clumps and then split it off. I don't know how they've done that, but that's really impressive. I'm really impressed with that. You see how Maria's hand splits off here? You don't need to draw that line to fully show that it's a finger. You can have a little dot there and a little line there, just to enough information to convey that's one of her fingers, you know? Also, look at Maria's hand animation here. It's gorgeous. Look at this. I love how they've added in the little detail of like her fingers not being fully line arted. Look at this. You see how it's like kind of like washed out the line art? You don't need to see all her fingers, all the line art for her fingers to know that's her fingers. It's just showing enough information it needs to convey. Like, it looks so hand drawn, it's beautiful. This is gorgeous. But look, see the bounce light, how it looks more direct? Now this looks more 2D. See how it's more harsher? It looks more, you know, intentionally 2D. You wanna know what they do for this jagged highlight up here? Look, they've actually changed the variation of it. You see how it's, the spikes change? But then it blends out? That's interesting. Is that? That's making me question. That's making me question things. Oh, like you can see the gradient, how you can see his ear changing color. Fully shaded, starting to get more highlighted. Whoa. You see the variation they add in his highlights here? Look there. I love how they went through the trouble of doing that. That's really cool. They've added variation. I love how they've like really replicated. Look at her mouth, how the line art. It's not fully line arted, her mouth. It's very true to the anime style. It's just so beautiful. I'm actually shook. I'm so shook. See how when she talks, the shading right down there. Right on her hair strand. You see how it bobs when she moves her jaw? If this was a 2D drawing, I don't think the animator would really add that sort of movement on her shoulder, you know? You know, it's really impressive. This is a 3D model. Because they've added in that, like, limited anime, like, frame rate sort of thing. The puffs of smoke and the, like, debris falling down, I'd definitely say that's probably most likely 2D animation. See how the shading constantly changes? The colours and the highlights and all that constantly changes. But yeah, you can see how this shadow ends here and this shadow ends here. I'd guess if this was like a 2D drawing, the animator would probably just make the shadow just fully go around instead of having this weird break between these two colours of shadows. But yeah, you can see Maria's hand here, how there's no line art there. The line art is actually very limited here. There's no line art there at all, really. See shadow stand. Like, it's so impressive, this. I'm so shocked. See here in his eye how they've not added full line art down there, because you know this is the end of his eye due to that little bit of line art there, because it suggests this is the end of his eye, you know. Look at how beautiful, like, yeah, this is definitely 2D animation. Emerald here is definitely 3D, because Emerald has this, like, you'll see this shot later on with Gerald and Emerald, for comparison. This is amazing. This is so, look at this. This is beautiful. Bro, this is so, oh my gosh, I'm actually so mind blown. But you can see here in the chest fluff how there's a bit of unnecessary shading here, in my opinion. This shot still looks really good. Maria looks really good. Like, the composition of these shots are like so cinematic, it's gorgeous. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Look at this. Yeah, look at these guys. That's terrifying. Gosh, look at this, it's beautiful. See how like limited the animation is? It's really true to the 2D style, trying to replicate. Look, this is gorgeous. I'm so mind blown. That's amazing, bro.
I'll handle this.
Look at this is beautiful. I'm so shook. I'm so shook. This is amazing. See how Maria's shadows in her hair are a lot more direct in these strands down here? They've definitely studied the like anime style and really tried to replicate it in 3D, and it's really good. It's amazing what they've tried to do. You know, you can say, oh, it's cheaper, oh, it looks bad. It's cheaper, therefore it's bad, or whatever. As someone who's tried 3D animation, it is not easy, and especially trying to replicate this, like, anime style. You may be like, oh, just slap on a toon shader or a cell shader thing, and bam, you're done. It is not easy as that. It's really complicated from what I've seen. They've really tried to stay true to that hand-drawn look, just with 3D. It looks so good, and because it's 3D, they don't have to redraw things all the time. It just means they can add more to this short, you know? They can make it longer, you know? Because think about it, it's less work having to hand draw it. They're still going for like the limited hand-drawn frames to capture that hand-drawn look. So that also means they can make the short a lot longer, but because it's less time spending hand drawing all these frames as well, because it's 3D. All you really need to do is just touch up a few of the shadows and highlights, but overall they're really there. This is really darn close to anime style, you know. This shadow on our head here, just a little bit here, is a little bit unnecessary. I think I can see they're trying to convey that there's a hair strand here, I guess, but I don't think it was really needed. Here you can definitely see they're doing the same thing with this, conveying that it's a hair strand here. Look at that! Like they've done their homework. They're really close to the anime style, really close. They've even added like the little highlights on her hair, you know, like an anime would. And they've kept her so simplified too, her face so simplified, just like an anime style. It's gorgeous.
I promise.
I'm so impressed with this. Look at that. It's like, one thing I love in this shot, instead of having to animate shadow like run off, look at that's really cool. I love how they've added the little effect, the little mist effect. But yeah, look, this shows how fast Shadow is. So we have one frame he's there, he anticipates him running. Next frame he dashes off, and he's gone. That's so cool. With the use of like 2D effects, it gives the illusion that he's running across. He's so fast, he's just this. But yeah, that's amazing. Bro, this shot is so cool. Look at the, you can definitely tell, see how it's inconsistent here with how many jags there are, like the jagged like shape, I guess. You can definitely tell the effects are 2D. Look at Maria's hair. You know what? Maria's hair here is hand drawn. See Maria's hair here in the shot? It is 2D. It's like, how do you do such a thing? How do you do that? Right. You see how Maria's hair has all these like, she has all these clumps, right? And all these shadows and highlights for these clumps. Try and find a better shot. Let's try and find. So you see here how she's got all these strands, right? You know, there's a lot of shadows. Maybe some in unnecessary places, like maybe there shouldn't be a shadow there. It's also a little bit inconsistent too. See, she's got a blob up there, but she's got a blob there. It's also in a different style from what you saw a little bit later on. You can see how she's got all these clumps. And see here, same here. She's got lots of shading, a bit too jagged, not very simplified. Shadow runs off. Look at how simplified her hair is. There's no shading like here. There's filled in shading on her hair here. But you see how her hair moves? There's no shading here at all. Even there's not as many clumps as before. It's very inconsistent. So you can see how there's only a couple of strands there, but there's a lot more there. That is hand drawn. Actually, scratch that. I'm cooking up that this Maria pose right here is fully hand drawn. Just because look at how direct the shadows are. You see how limited there? There's not like any unnecessary clumps. There's only shadows where there needs to be shadows. So this Maria pose here is hand drawn. This is 2D drawing. I can definitely tell. Look at that. You see how her hair is very simple. See how there's only one shadow there and there's a shadow right at the bottom. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's a shadow right in the bottom of her hair. You see how simplified that is? That is 2D animation. How inconsistent the line art is, you know, there's different hair strands. How loose it is, because it's probably easier to animate our hair flowing like that, 2D than 3D. See how the shadows are very limited too? Whereas you compare it to this, you see the difference? You see here in Maria how there's this little highlight artifact here. This probably shouldn't be something. There's this weird shading thing right down here too. Probably would maybe emphasize that a little more, but it's more like they've tried to replicate it really close though in 3D. But if you look at how more direct her shading is. You see that? It's only a shade there. It's very, very direct of how she's bending and how her skirt is going along. Her legs bending. Same with her hair. It's very simplified. Yeah, so that's 2D. You want to know something? I reckon this shot of Maria right here is a 2D drawing, 2D animation as well. It's like, what makes you think that? You see how her pinky sticks out a lot more? It's these little minor inconsistencies. You see how the line art here is also a lot thinner than before? You see how it's a lot more thicker here? Back at this shot, but I love how they've took away the line here. They don't really need to show that her hair is going down. It's enough detail to show that it's going in a swoop. And you see how like the shading, you know, there's this weird jagged thing, you know, she goes like that and it's like, and then it's down. It's like 3D shading. But if you look over here, when Shadow runs away from Maria, the shading in the line art is a lot more intentional. which implies it is a 2D drawing. See here the fabric here, I'll go on about the fabric a little bit later. Maria's hair is quite inconsistent, which implies it's a 2D animation. Because she's in one pose, they don't need to animate her, so they've just drew her here, because look at her shadows. See how they're a lot more intentional? Even the rim lighting's a lot more intentional too. Shading inside of her face there. See how her pinky sticks up? Which implies this is 2D. It's a different style than before of her hands. See how the shading is very intentional. There's a shading here, a few creases there. There's no shading here at all, but there's a shading on her knee, and a few creases behind there. It implies it's 2D because it's very intentional. This is beautiful. You see here the blobs change? You know, she's got little blobs to indicate, you know, shading here on her hair. See how it moves? Here, see how that blob changes shape? It's definitely 2D, 110%. She's a 2D drawing. Because it's 2D and it's hand-drawn, it can go a bit wild in the flow of her hair. Like, that's gorgeous. That's beautiful. That's 100% 2D. That's beautiful. Shadow is definitely 3D. I can tell. You see how before Maria's shading was so direct there in the shot before that? So look at Shadow. See how it's got jag. You can see that Shadow's got this highlight up here. You can just tell by the way the Shadow behaves as he runs that this is a 3D model. Quality is a lot more sharper, I'd say, than it was of Maria. It's hard to describe. And they're really limited as animation too, but I love the composition of this shot. Maria zooms out and we're into Shadow. I like how he fades into the background. That's awesome. Compared to like those 2D drawings of Maria that I pointed out, you can definitely tell this is 3D. But it's like really cool though. I love their use of switching between 2D and 3D. And Shadow fades into the background. I'm gonna say, for these shots that Gerald is in, I'm speculating that he's a 2D drawing, he's not a 3D model. Which does that imply he might not be in the short much? Maybe. Which might imply that he might not be in the short much, I don't know, we'll see when the full short comes out. Gerald here is a 2D drawing. Emerald is 3D. You see that jag here on his shadow? It should be just a smooth shadow because he's very round, so it should be just a smooth shadow, kind of like here, how it's like that. You see here there's more jaggedness here, a little bit. But with Gerald, look at how precise his shadows are. There's no weird jagging like that. It's one jag in there, one jag in there, a little bit of a jag here to show how tightly Emerald's gripping onto his shirt, you know? Just enough information to convey. But you can see here how he has that little, Emerald has that little jag in his face, where Gerald's shadows are a lot more intentional, you can just tell. So you can tell he's a 3D model and he's a 2D drawing, right? This little quick shot of Gerald turning, this is a mix of frame by frame and tweening. Let's go through the shot frame by frame. Look at the line width here. See how he's got a little line here and he's got a little line here? Notice how throughout that animation that stays the exact same up here, right? Same with the sweat droplet and his wrinkle. So you can see that this, you can see like these move. This is tweened. The sweat droplets moved a little bit to convey perspective that his head is turning. You can see how his eyebrow is also tweened. Gerald's nose here is hand drawn. See how it's more curved there, more straight there. See how the shape changes? And also look, see, there's also there's a wee line here that gets added when he turns. See how the line gets added? Pretty sure this line here is tweened. See how it stays the same? His cheek here is hand drawn. You can see how it changes in consistency. See how it changes? I think his glasses are tweened. See here how the cracks in his glasses here are hand drawn. So this is a mix of tweened animation. Basically, if you're wondering what's tween, so basically see his sweat droplet. See how it stays the same? But it's just budged over here, so it's like telling a frame to start here and end there, and the computer kind of fills in the gaps. That's tweened animation. They've really tried to make this look 3D, but it's actually 2D. So this shot of Gerald is entirely 2D. Some of it's tweened, some of it's frame by frame. I think it's a really good use of animation. Oh yes, this is interesting. So Gerald here, look at how more direct his shadows are. They're very intentional. Very limited and very intentional. Gerald's got a lot more gradients on him. I quite like the bounce, like how it goes over the line art like that, gives it more of a 2D look. This shot is really interesting. Look! Oh my gosh, I can't believe I just noticed that. That's so cool, right? Look. So Gerald is 3D. There's a highlight there and there's a highlight there, and the shadows kind of are very jagged. See how there's a shadow there. You know, you can just tell, right? And the thickness of Emerald's line art is mostly the same. You can see how the shadows are they look 3D, you know, you can tell this is a 3D model. Look at Gerald. You see the line thickness change in the edges of his mustache? He's got a lot more black shadows. here. Probably to try and match Emerald a little bit. See, the line art and the shading is very intentional. Look at this. See when Emerald moves away, you can tell. See how Gerald bobs around a little bit? So you can tell that's a flat PNG image probably of Gerald, and they've probably put him in front of Emerald to make it look like he's gripping onto his shirt. Very sneaky. I caught you there. Yeah, look at that. You see how Gerald bobs around? Look at Emerald's hand. And look at the edge of Gerald's shirt. You see that? I've took away the shadow here just to make him look more 2D, I guess. You know, change the consistency of Emerald to make him look a bit inconsistent, which is quite nice. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it gives it more of a 2D look. But you can tell, Gerald in all these shots are hand-drawn. He is not a 3D model. But yeah, you don't see Gerald bopping around unless you look at it frame by frame. Obviously, you're not meant to look at this frame by frame. You're just meant to view it how it is. You know, you don't see Gerald bobbing around, but if you look at it frame by frame, you see it. So you can definitely tell Gerald is not a 3D model. He's a 2D drawing here. But Emerald is a 3D model, which is really cool. Yeah, an in-between leg shot of Shadow running, I think? Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. It blurs a little bit, so you see Shadow coming onto the edge of the screen. Blurs. And then you can see how his shading's very jagged here, whereas Gerald, it was not like that at all. Actually, they didn't put any line art on Shadow here. He looks more of a 3D model here because there's not really any line art at all. Yeah, you can definitely tell the effects here are 2D. They're like little hand-drawn squiggles here. Yeah, see how direct his line art is in his shading, whereas Emerald's is more, you can just tell, you know, his Gerald's shading's a lot more simplified than Emerald's. You might put it onto like, oh, he's metal, he's whatever, but yeah. Even like the jagged shading that you saw in the previous shots, you don't really see it much here because it's a close-up shot of his hand and it wanted to look good. You can see how his shirt is inconsistent and the wrinkles too, you know, because 2D. But that's the same frame, just budged over a little bit, I think. That's a new frame. They've really fixed up the shadows in Emerald's hand here because it's a very close-up shot. That's so interesting how Emerald's 3D and Gerald is 2D. And a good reason to see how Emerald's 3D in this shot, even though his shading does look quite, like, it looks quite intentional with shading here. You see how his finger waddles here, how it's the same thickness and all that inconsistency, whereas Gerald constantly changes. You see how the line art in his clothing here changes. It's more slack now. And it's not as like scrunched. It's more loose, I guess. But yeah, Gerald is 2D, Emerald is 3D. Ooh, that's a little bit of squash and stretch there, I think. See how his feet scrunch up to anticipate his shot? You see that? Really cool. It's anticipation. It's a good rule of animation. Look at Emerald's highlights and shadows. You see how it's more detailed than Gerald. You see Gerald, he's got multiple layers of shadows here, but they're very solid and consistent, you know. Oh wow, you can actually see like the pixels of Gerald here. That's quite interesting. You can see the fill line too. I like how they've tried to give him that angular like look on his head. They tried to give him an angular look to make him look like it's like polygons in his head, I guess. Or maybe it's just his style, I don't know. Probably looking too deep into it. Oh wow, look at the motion blur here. That's really cool. You see how his hands are different from this frame to that frame? 2D. Oh, I love that, so cool. Look at the stretch in Emerald's model here. That's so good, so cool. It really emphasizes how fast he's moving. And there's Gerald, he bashes the ground. See the shading inconsistencies here, how the width changes and all that? His arms scrunching up. Even the shadows there. Yeah, so Gerald is 100% 2D in all these shots. Tweened a little bit, but he's 2D drawn, you know, he's hand drawn. Now I love that I've tried to make him match with the other characters too, by adding this like rim light too. You know, I've tried to make him blend in. I like it if I also went for the effort to add a gradient here in the shadow. You know, it's black and then it fades into like a grey colour. Really interesting. One frame he's got the crease, I guess. How clothes all have that little shoulder thing. And one frame out the other. And look at Gerald's leg too, his knee. How it changes shape depending on what shot, you know. 2D animation. Same with his mustache. See how it changes? Gosh, yeah, I can definitely tell the effects are 2D. But the characters are 3D. And the background's most likely 3D too. Yeah, you can definitely tell these guys are 3D. Especially compared to Gerald, but like, yeah. You can just tell these guys are 3D. You can look at the jag there, you know, whereas Gerald was draggy, but it was very intentional. Very sharp, I guess, you know, it's like, whew, instead of going, you know, like that. They did the same thing with every shot of Shadow when he was running up to get Emerald, when he was holding Gerald. You know, he was lionless in that shot too, so they made him lionless here. There's a, what do you call it, it's like a sound wave. I can't remember the name, I've forgotten the name, but you know, like a little wave of wind to show, even the blurring too, to show how much impact that kick had. And then to add into it, they add hand-drawn impact frames. You see this a lot in anime. Look at that, so cool. That's amazing. Then it ends. You know, do you want my theory? My theory for why they didn't add line art here is because they're so far away you don't see the line art anyway. But in the close-up you do see them lineless. Because this shot is so far away, you don't see the line art and it'll just get in the way of what you're trying to see here. That's my theory for why it's lineless in this shot. It could just be a stylization choice, but overall, this animation's amazing. I love the use of the different tools of animation, how it uses 3D animation to look 2D, and it follows the 2D animation rules, if that makes sense, a style of 2D animation, more particularly anime animation. I love how it uses frame-by-frame animation as well for certain shots, like the effects, the visual effects like the smoke, and what do you call it, like the really cool lightning effects that you see here. This is all hand-drawn too. Gosh, it's amazing. Use tweening as well for Gerald. Maria, in her last two shots she's in, is hand-drawn, fully hand-drawn. You can just tell by the shading on her and the line quality as well. It's really cool. All the shots Gerald is in is 2D. Very interesting. I quite like it. My theory for why Maria was hand-drawn in her last two shots she was in is because of the way her hair was blowing in the wind. The 3D model would probably break, or the shading would break if you tried to do that. So, because they really want to exaggerate how fast Shadow was going. So they made her hair really move. And it's hard to do that in a 3D model and make it look good, I guess. It would have been easier for them to hand draw her hair moving like that exaggerated instead of using the 3D model. So that's probably why they went for the 2D look in the end. The 2D animation. Really amazing. This is just my rambles of this animation. It's really good. I can't wait to see the whole thing. I love trying to catch all the little details and how, because it's really fascinating how they put this all together, you know? Because as an animator, I love looking into other animations and studying them. I do this sort of thing in my spare time anyway. It's just so fun. But yeah, this short is really beautifully animated. I love the use of 3D animation they've done here and how they've tried to replicate the 2D look. It's really good. It's amazing. It's great animation. I love it.